was put online. There's a lot in that speech that could lead to good conversation, especially around division and dignity and how we speak to each other. This clip has a line in it that I want you to pay attention to. And when you go home, if you haven't as yet, the email I sent you has the link to the video. I want you to listen for this line, where he says, somewhere along the line, the person sitting across the table stopped being a person and became an obstacle. And as you watch, just pay attention to what the line brings up in you. Now, to give you just some little background on Noah Eckstein, he starts by saying his story is like a joke. A Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian walk into a bar. And that's because his background includes all three faiths. So let's watch that little clip now.
My grandfather's one, a Pakistani Muslim who grew up in the middle of the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947. The other, a Jewish refugee of the Holocaust, met many times over the course of their lives. As you might imagine, they disagreed on a great many things. And yet, one of the main memories I have of them growing up was seeing them sitting together at a coffee table, discussing everything under the sun. And yet, somewhere in between their generation and ours, something in the conversation shifted. People speaking without listening, people arguing, having already decided their own allegiances, people debating not to listen, understand, or to learn, but to win, to humiliate, to be right. And somewhere along the way, the person sitting across the table stopped being a person and became an obstacle. Now, some would say that there are in fact people in this world for whom understanding is neither owed nor even worth the attempt. People whose very irredeemable actions or beliefs place them beyond the reach of dialogue. People who indeed have become nothing more than obstacles to the greater good. And maybe that's true. Well, my grandfathers survived the atrocities of war and worse, and they knew better than anyone that people can do monstrous things. They also knew the most terrifying fact of all, which is that the peoples doing those monstrous things, they were human. And it's precisely because of that human capacity that understanding them mattered. Dialogue still mattered. If such questions of understanding matter that much at that extreme of humanity, how much more do they matter for the people sitting around you right now? For that family member at Thanksgiving that you stop bringing certain topics up around. For that person on the internet that says things from a viewpoint that seems kind of unimaginable sometimes. Or for that one friend that you started to phase out because they said some things once that just didn't sit quite right with you. Because in a time this complicated and this divided, understanding and a genuine willingness to look a little bit deeper is how those divisions start to heal. My grandfather's one, a Pakistani Muslim.
So I have to admit to that, listening to that and preaching about it is still pretty hard for me because I still struggle with that. I struggle when I am supposed to treat somebody that I see as having completely different views to me as somebody that I think still deserves my time and my attention because it is so draining for me. And yet, when you listen to his speech, he is saying that, yes, these are things that we ought to do. We ought to take the time. There's much in his speech that I think is worthy of listening to. But as I said, the one thing that stood out for me is that the problem is when the person across this table stopped being a person and became an obstacle. And that line stayed with me because I am guilty of it. I'm guilty that sometimes I look at somebody and I immediately think of them as an obstacle. That immediately I see them and I see them as a problem, an interruption. I see them as a category that I want to set aside or a threat. And I know that many of you know what it's like to see somebody no longer as a person, but as an obstacle. And it can happen in many ways, in many little ways that we do this, across political lines, across cultural divides. It can happen in ordinary life. You know, when the person in front of you in the grocery store has 10 items in the 8-item express line. When the person in front of you is a person that becomes that driver, the slow driver, the obnoxious driver, just trying to get somewhere. It happens at work, in families, in church, around tables where everybody has different opinions and different histories and different fears. We look at somebody and without even realizing it sometimes, we reduce them. We stop seeing them as a whole human being, and we start seeing the thing that frustrates us or threatens us or gets in the way. That person becomes an obstacle. Now, Eckstein's speech suggests that part of the way to deal with this is through curiosity and understanding. He's saying that we have to recover that ability to sit across from another person and actually wonder what shaped them, who they are, what made them understand things they do. And that is true, and that is good, and that's why his speech went viral. We need more curiosity. We need more listening. We need more willingness to see people as more than the label that we first put on them. But here in the Gospels, I think that Jesus is actually calling us to push past even that, to push past that curiosity, to push past that trying to understand them. Jesus is calling us, and I know John spoke to this last week, but Jesus is calling us to move towards mercy, to be the neighbor, and what that means to God. So we see that clearly in this parable that Jesus tells in Luke 10, when the lawyer stands up to test Jesus. Teacher, what must I do to inherit life? And Jesus wants him to say it himself. He knows what he has to do, and he gives the right answer. Love the Lord your God with your heart, your strength, your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, yeah, you got it. You got the right answer. Good for you. Go do this now. Go and live. And the lawyer goes, okay, but who is my neighbor? And it sounds like a reasonable question. If Jesus is saying, love your neighbor as yourself is a right question, then who's my neighbor? And it sounds like he just wants clarification. But really, when it comes down to it, it's a boundary question. He wants to know who he can see as his obstacle still and let that be okay, while still ticking all the boxes. He wants to know who qualifies to be his neighbor. He wants to know who is close enough, familiar enough, respectable enough, similar enough, deserving enough to receive his compassion. And I think that's where we can especially relate to that too. Because we may not say it like that, but we might say things like, well, how involved do I have to get with this person? How much of this person is really my problem? How much do I really have to care about this person? How much do I have to tolerate this person and their beliefs and the things I don't agree with them about? So, of course, I love that Jesus, instead of giving him a definition for a neighbor, tells him the story that you all know very well. The man going down to Jericho, this dangerous road, was robbed and left for half dead on the road. And we often hear that story from the perspective of the people passing by. Why did the priest pass by? He should have stopped. Why did the Levite pass by? He should have known better. Were they too busy? Were they too afraid? Were they worried about becoming unclean? But imagine for a moment the man on the road. Imagine for a moment you are the man on the road, too wounded, cannot explain what happened to you. You cannot prove that you are worth being helped. You cannot reassure anyone that helping you will be simple and safe and not put you too much out of your way. And the man, he's just there in need, and he sees somebody come in. And maybe he can open his eyes and he can see the priest, and he says, yes, the priest is going to help me. The priest is somebody who sees me and he knows me. He's one of my own. But the priest passes him by. Even though the priest sees him, he passes him by on the other side. And then the Levite comes, another religious person, and the man's hopes have been dashed once, but surely the Levite will help him. Surely the Levite will help you. You are worthy, aren't you? You're not an obstacle. He sees, and he passes by too. And I think that Jesus emphasizes that for a reason. They all see him. And whatever is going on in their minds, they don't see a human being. They don't see somebody in need. Even though that person looks like them, they know that he believes like them, they still see the man as an obstacle, something to avoid, a risk to their safety, and a complication they don't want to enter into. And that's one of the uncomfortable truths of this story. Because it's easy for us to say, well, they don't look like me, they don't believe like me, and therefore they're an obstacle. But the truth is, they don't need to be strangers to be obstacles to us. Sometimes even people who can share our faith and our background and our language and our community can become obstacles when their needs are more than we want to give of our time. And it can happen in church life too. Sometimes grief of another person becomes inconvenient to us. Sometimes loneliness becomes too time-consuming for us, and we see the person as an obstacle. Somebody's crisis becomes too complicated. Somebody's need doesn't fit neatly into our schedule or our budget or our emotional capacity. And without meaning it, we see them, but we step aside. You're an obstacle, we say silently. We don't say it out loud, but our actions can say it. And then Jesus introduces the Samaritan. And because we live 2,000 plus years after this story, our mind about Samaritan is automatically positive. The good Samaritan, the person who helps. But that's not what Jesus' first hearers would have heard, as you know. To them, a Samaritan was a person who is an outsider, an obstacle, the religious and cultural enemy, the person they had been taught to distrust and avoid. If Jesus was telling this story in our neighborhood today, imagine somebody you think you could never get along with. That immigrant, that LGBTQ person, that anti-LGBTQ person, that person who's pro-Palestine, that person who is anti-Israel, that person who is pro-occupation. Think about the person that you think is the least deserving. That's the person in this story who Jesus places as a hero. Think about the person whose politics bothers you, or their theology offends you. Their background makes you suspicious. Their presence makes you tense. That's the part of the shock of this parable. The wounded man was an obstacle to the priest and the Levite, but the Samaritan, that awful person, saw the man and did something different. The Levite and the priest walked away, and then the Samaritan comes near. Can you imagine the person lying on the road, seeing the Samaritan come near to him? Could you imagine what he must be feeling? He's still a Jew. He's still somebody who would recognize a man as a Samaritan. What was he supposed to do? Turn him away? See him as an obstacle? He couldn't. And the Samaritan isn't just looking at him and going, oh, I should help him. He doesn't just feel sorry for the man and moves on his way. He goes to the man, he tends to his wounds, he pours oil and wine on them. He puts the man on his own animal. Jesus tells everything this man is doing for a reason. He brings him to an inn. He pays for his needs. He promises to come back. That is where Jesus takes us beyond Eckstein's speech today. Because we can all try to understand somebody, and we can all try to be curious about them, and we can still keep our distance. It's possible to be informed and still unmoved. But the Samaritan does not see an obstacle. The Samaritan sees a human person in need, and he does the best. And at the end of the story, Jesus turns to the lawyer and asks him, well, who is the neighbor? Which of these three was the neighbor? The lawyer wanted to know, who is my neighbor? Jesus asks him, who of the three is my neighbor? And the lawyer has to admit, the one who showed mercy, the one who didn't see the person as an obstacle, the one who saw him as a human being. Go and do likewise, he says. The other thing that's important about this is that Jesus also puts a parameter on it. See, he doesn't say that the man just hung around and continued to deplete himself. The man knew he had other things to do too. The man knew that he had his business to do. And so he does as much as he can, the Good Samaritan does as much as he can for this person on the road, but then he goes to do what he can. Because sometimes people read this story and they say, well, you're just supposed to help me and 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 help me. And Jesus is saying, no, this isn't a story about depleting yourself. This is still a story about doing what you can, as you can, when you can, but not see the person as an obstacle. And I think the greatest story in this is that God acts in the same way. Because God didn't look at us humans and see an obstacle. God doesn't look at us and see we're too broken or too difficult or too sinful or too far gone. In Jesus, God came near to us when God sees us. God crosses the road and God tends to our wounds and our need for healing at great cost to himself. While we were broken and while we were distant and while we were acting like God is our enemy, Christ came near to us. That is grace. And so I think put together Noah Eckstein's speech that went viral. Think about why it went viral. What is it that made that go viral? And it wasn't outrage, and it wasn't a political divide. It was him saying, see the person across the room, not as an obstacle, but as a person. And Jesus takes that one step further and says, and then do this. See them as God would see them. Move towards them. Act with mercy. Do what you can, because God does that for us. That's grace. And so this week coming, pay attention to the moments when someone starts becoming only a problem in your mind, and I promise I will do that too. Pay attention to when you stop being curious. Pay attention to when you begin to reduce someone to their opinion, or to their need, or to their mistake. And then again, listen to Jesus, and imagine that you are the person on the road in need. Imagine that you are the person who might be seen as the obstacle and what you would want. And then go and do likewise. Because the real obstacle at the end of the day isn't the person in front of us. The real obstacle is ourselves when we stop giving mercy. And by the grace of God, that story can change. Amen.